So, who are you?
I'm Stewart Parkin.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
where are we? Because there's a lot of interesting scribbling on your boards, and you
Well,
were in the E Times.
we're at the IBM Almaden Research Center,
Yeah,
and here I manage a group in spintronics,
yeah.
and hopefully develop new materials and devices that will have an impact on the world.
Yeah.
Maybe change the world.
No, I was here a few months ago, almost a year ago now. It's like crazy how time flies. And you're studying the spin on the electron, right? I mean, explain what you guys do, because I can't do a good job of it.
Well, we're not studying directly the spin on the electron, but we're trying to use the spin on the electron to create useful devices. So if you like, conventional microelectronic devices use charge, the electron's charge.
Yep.
You store charge or you flow charge to make useful devices. And so what we're doing is going a little bit beyond that, to use the spin of the electron, and in fact to create spin polarized currents. Currents where the electrons have their spins oriented in one direction. And it turns out that you can then build devices in which you can turn on and off the flow of spin polarized electrons, so as to create useful types of sensing devices or memory devices or potentially logic devices.
Wow. Why? Well, first of all, how did you guys discover that the electron can be spun in one direction or the other?
Well, we didn't discover that.
Okay.
That's been known for 100 years or more. Well,
Okay.
no, not more, maybe a little less than 100 years. And when in the early part of the last century, people were discovering quantum aspects of physics and quantum aspects of particles. And then it was discovered that in order to account for the certain properties of materials, then an electron has to have this quantum mechanical property of spin. And it's called spin because spin is associated with, if you like, some kind of angular momentum. So just like a mechanical object has a spin and a spinning top, and it retains that spin unless you do something to it. Well, an electron spin is the same thing. An electron looks like a spinning top in some sense, but it can only be spun in two directions. It can be spun, so if you like, an anti-clockwise direction and a clockwise direction, or spun up and spun down. But just like mechanical objects, then you could use the spin of the electron to do certain things. So for example, if you take a mechanical object which is spinning, and you try to stop it, in response, in principle, the Earth will rotate, because you conserve angular momentum. And it's the same thing with spin, you conserve spin angular momentum. So it turns out that it's been only recognized maybe 10 years ago, and demonstrated in the last 4 or 5 years, that you could really use a current of electrons spinning in the same direction. And when you pass that current into a magnetic material, let's say whose magnetic moment is consistent with the electron spinning in the opposite direction, then the electron's spin current will actually can cause that magnetic material to rotate its magnetic moment direction. So it's like taking, if you have a little compass, a compass is a needle of magnetic material that points along the Earth's magnetic field. So if you pass a current of electrons into a needle, a magnetic needle, it can cause it to rotate, as if in response to a magnetic field. But it's not a magnetic field, it's the torque from the current of angular spin momentum of the electrons.
Wow. And so what do you think you would use this for? I mean, you probably have some ideas of what you're going to use.
So it turns out that about 12 years ago, we proposed for the first time that we could build an interesting memory device where we would store information in essentially the direction of the magnetic moment of a material. So let's say take a compass needle, it can point to the north, it can point to the south. So if we can design a compass needle so that it will only point to the north or to the south. It won't point at any intermediate directions. So then you can store information. Is this magnetic moment pointing in one direction or is it pointing in the opposite direction? And it turns out the trick is to discover which direction it points in using very little energy. So we propose that we could use something called a magnetic tunnel junction. It's a sandwich of two magnetic layers separated by a very, very thin layer of an insulating material. And it turns out if you pass current then from one magnetic layer to the other, if the moment's pointing in the same direction, like two compass needles pointing in the same direction, then the current can flow easily. Because essentially, when you pass current through a magnetic material, then the electrons will orient their spins so they're parallel to the local moment direction. That happens in a very short distance. And so now you have two magnetic layers separated in between by a non-magnetic material, and the electrons then leave the first magnetic material, they tunnel through this non-magnetic spacer layer, which is an insulator, into the second layer. Then if they're in the same direction of moments, the electrons can tunnel easily. But if these moments are oriented in the opposite direction, then the flow of electrical current is impeded, it's reduced. So you can change the resistance of a magnetic sandwich by simply changing the magnetic moment direction of one of these layers. When they're parallel, these two moments, if they're identical magnetic layers in this sandwich,
Yep.
then the conductance is high when they're parallel.
Yep.
When they're antiparallel, conductance is low. Essentially because magnetic materials prefer electrons whose spins are pointing in the same direction.
Yep.
So if you like two moments in the same direction, all the electrons, there's one type of electron which can pass through easily.
So could you build new kinds of processors or new kinds of memory, or?
Yeah, we can build a new type of memory. Idea is we have the sandwich, and the memory element is the sandwich. So you fix the moment of one moment, so it's always fixed. There's some tricks of spin engineering we invented a few years ago, and then the other moment is pointing in one direction or the other. So back to your original question, turns out what is now known is that when you pass a relatively small current, you can cause this moment to switch.
Yep.
So this is how you would write the device. And then to read it, you just pass a much smaller current. And when they're parallel, current passes easily. When they're antiparallel, passes less easily. So you use the current to detect the state of the memory.
Now the memory in this little camera is probably a solid state SSD kind of memory or something like
Right.
that. This new kind of memory that you're thinking of or working on developing, what would be its advantages over the current technology? Would it be smaller? Would it be less battery life or less power consumption? Why invest in this new kind of memory?
Yeah, why invest in new type? Okay, because this new type of memory, just like your flash memory, most likely in the camera, then it is non-volatile. No power is needed to maintain this memory, but it's much greater performance. You can switch this magnetic element in a few nanoseconds. It doesn't take much time. So that's the advantage. It's very fast. Fast for reading and fast for writing as compared to flash memory. And otherwise, there's no mechanism to break this memory. So in flash memory, you write it 10,000 times and you start to degrade the memory. So you're limited, the endurance is very limited. In this magnetic type of memory, the endurance we think is pretty unlimited, and you need very little power to write it. It's non-volatile, so it's a pretty high performance. It may be a little more expensive than flash memory because the cell size might be a little bit bigger. However, even in the last year or two, there are new developments in our understanding of how to use this spin polarized current to switch the device.
Yeah.
And if we could reduce that current a little bit, then the power goes down, we can make smaller cells and use smaller transistors, which makes the cell smaller, make it cheaper. So it looks like we're on the verge of building a very interesting non-volatile magnetic memory based on these magnetic tunnel junction sandwiches.
That's crazy.
And then it would compete with flash, roughly the same price. Well, it'd be more expensive, but much, many orders of magnitude faster.
Yeah, and let me develop cameras that can have 4 times the resolution, say, of this one, right? Because this one probably is struggling to keep up with the memory.
Could be.
Memory.
For that camera, probably would need it because taking video and taking pictures is very slow. So you don't really need high performance memory. What you care about is the densest possible memory, which is very cheap. So another project we're working on, so this magnetic tunnel junction based memory we demonstrated actually a long time ago, in '99 in one form. It wasn't scalable, but where are we now, nearly 10 years later, still working on it. But a new type of memory we've come up with, we call racetrack memory. Then that would be, we think, as cheap or cheaper than flash memory, but maybe 1 million times faster. So it'd be much high performance, there'd be no wear out, and that would be truly change.
Now that would matter to somebody like Google, right, who wants to replace hard drives in their memories in their data centers, because any memory is probably faster than a hard drive.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So hard drives,
but they can't handle investing in something that's going to go dead after 10,000 writes, right? And so having this kind of new memory is going to be allow them to put it in a data center where it's going to do millions and millions of read and write cycles, right?
Well, disk drives are still much cheaper than the flash memory, maybe by a factor of 20 to 100 times.
Yeah.
So really, you need to build a solid. But as you said, disk drives consume lots of power. They're very large and they're rather unreliable because they're mechanical.
Yep.
So what you really want is, and they're very slow because they're mechanical. You have to rotate a disk. It takes about 10 milliseconds to access the first bit. So the latency is very long. So what probably Google and Microsoft and IBM would like to have for developments in in lots of things, on computing on demand, cloud computing.
Yep.
Then you want to use memory devices or storage devices that are very fast but still very cheap.
Yep.
So what we think we can do is build a new type of device which, using spintronics, but which would be essentially as cheap as a disk drive.
Yep.
We do that very simply. It's a very, very simple concept. Disk drives and the flash memory you're using, essentially two-dimensional technologies.
Yep.
Where you have an array of transistors in the one case, or an array of magnetic bits disposed on the surface of a magnetic layer in another case. So our idea is really want to build three-dimensional devices. And in the racetrack memory, what we propose to do is to store information as magnetic bits along tall columns, tall magnetic nanowires that we will build above the surface of a silicon wafer. And then the idea is each column we would store 10 or 100 bits of data, and we would move the data up and down the column
Wow.
to an element for reading and writing.
So this is like the discovery of how to build a city instead of having, ranch-style homes in a community.
Very
right?
much so, indeed.
So you're going to be able to pack a lot more bits into one small area.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more efficient. It's cheaper.
How far away is all this stuff that we're
It's
talking
pretty
about?
close. So last year we
Pretty
worked
close
on,
for a researcher's 20
Yeah.
years, right?
Yeah.
By the end of my life,
Well, it turns out we've been working on it for maybe 4 years.
Yeah.
And we think we've demonstrated the basic principles of how to make this memory work. And in particular, we've demonstrated we can take nanowires, we can put a series of, we'll use magnetic boundaries between oppositely magnetized regions. As these are the domain walls. The domain walls we put in a series of domain walls, each one representing a 0 or a 1. And we've been able to put 6 domain walls into a wire and move them together with pulses of current. That's the idea. So the idea is, what makes racetrack memory possible is exactly the concept we talked about, that you could use a current of spin polarized electrons to manipulate magnetization. And what we can do is, if you have a wire magnetized in opposite directions with a wall, we pass current, which is spin polarized automatically by simply passing through the magnetic material. The wall will move. And it turns out if we have a series of walls, the first wall moments point towards each other, the next wall they'll point away from each other. So we have a series of walls in this way, and current will cause all these walls to move in the same direction. We've just demonstrated that. What's with very short, nanosecond long current pulses, very, very fast. So people have thought about using domain walls to build memory and logic devices, very elegant ideas, for 50 years. But what makes it very tough is if you use magnetic fields as was necessary, then the neighboring domain walls, the first one is the moments point towards each other, the next domain wall they point away from each other, and with field, which favors a single direction of magnetization, these two walls will actually move towards each other or away from each other. So basically destroy all the walls. But with spin polarized current, the same walls pointing, this way and that way, they actually move in the same direction. With current. So we demonstrated that. That makes racetrack possible.
Just in the last few months you've demonstrated
Well, we
that?
published two papers actually in Science magazine last April.
Okay.
And that basically was demonstrating for the first time that very short nanosecond long current pulses will indeed move neighboring domain walls in the same direction in a highly controlled way.
Yeah.
So we think we have all the understanding we need to build racetrack memory. So you asked your question, how long? Well, really, we still need to do some physics, and we need to change the materials, so maybe we need use a little less current, and we have to build then wires which we'd like to make vertical, and then build reading and writing elements, one per device, without have to do that very cheaply. But we think it's possible. So we think initially, within maybe 3 to 4 years, we could demonstrate a memory that would have the same cost as, say, flash memory, but would have no wear out and would be a million times faster. So that would already, if we could do that at the same cost, that seems like that would have tremendous advantages, even
Absolutely.
compared to flash.
Absolutely.
So that's what we hope to do in the next few years.
So what's your daily life like? Because working on big problems like this,
Yeah.
probably each day you might not even notice that you're getting toward a goal, but you have really interesting machinery down the hall, which we've covered on previous videos. What's your daily life like?
Oh, daily life. Well, of course, daily life was a lot of fun, really. A lot of fun. I have a fantastic group of people working with me, and so we're basically exploring the physics, the dynamics of moving domain walls is one project. Trying to build this racetrack memory, thinking of ways of reading and writing these domain walls, integrating, building devices here for studying the physics and the materials. And with our colleagues in our sister research lab on the East Coast in Yorktown Heights, they're building, using their CMOS facility, they're building on silicon wafers test vehicles, so we can then use those chips here to build the nanowires on top and then study physics and device aspects of racetrack memory. That's one project. Also, we spent 5 years building this rather elaborate deposition tool, where we can atomically layer materials and essentially build materials that you can't find in nature, one atomic layer at a time, using different techniques. And our goal there is to come up with materials that have both interesting physics and yet at the same time could be useful for sensing or memory or logic or some other application.
Yeah, we got a look at that machine last time I was here. It's quite an interesting machine. Costs like $20 million or something crazy.
No, not 20, maybe a few million, 8 million possibly.
Okay.
But it is an amazing machine. We're just building the last chamber. It'll be delivered next week, and then we'll have an additional capability. We basically want to use different techniques for depositing individual atomic layers. So far we've got some techniques.
When you were a kid, did you ever imagine you could lay stuff down one atomic layer at a time?
Well, people have. It is amazing. It's really only in the last 20 years that it's been possible to build thin film structures. So some of the work that I did 20 years ago was we demonstrated, I think, for the very first time that you could build useful multi-layered magnetic structures by atomically engineering individual atomic layers of different elements.
Yeah.
And we demonstrated that we could actually see differences, dramatic differences in magnetic and magnetotransport properties of layers of magnetic materials separated by metal layers, where we changed the spacing, the thickness of that metal layer by a single layer.
Yeah.
Even a simple metal like copper. If you put copper between thin layers of cobalt, which is one of the few magnetic materials, elements, which is magnetic at room temperature, then when the copper layer is, when the copper layer is 5 atoms thick, then the cobalt want to be, let's say parallel, but when it's 6 layers thick, the moments will be coupled antiparallel. And when it's 7, they'll be parallel again. And we could change the nature of the magnetic moment directions of these 2 cobalt layers by simply changing the copper layer spacing on the atomic scale.
Wow.
We were the first to demonstrate this, and I discovered that the long range, there is a long range magnetic coupling through copper that oscillates from parallel coupling, ferromagnetic coupling, to antiferromagnetic, to ferromagnetic backwards and forwards, with a spacing varying between just 5 and 10 atomic layers of copper.
Yeah.
Or chromium, or ruthenium. In fact, we looked at the whole periodic table.
Wow. Do you ever have a sense of the competition? Because I know at HP they're doing memory research and processor research, and over in Japan and China now is doing weird stuff. Do you ever have a sense that you're in a race to discover the next?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what makes it exciting. There are very, very good groups in all those countries you mentioned, in China and Japan and Europe. Well, it's a continent, of course, but indeed there are extremely good scientists all around the world, and part of the, in some sense, fun, and actually what makes progress happen more quickly is that many people are working on problems, and you don't make all the discoveries yourself. You'd like to, but it's really not possible. And many other groups will come up with some very inventive and clever ways of whatever, new physics, new materials, new devices, and everybody benefits from the strengths of each other, I think.
Yeah. What does it mean to you to work in IBM research? Because this is where the disk drive was invented and all sorts of interesting stuff. As a researcher, what does that mean? Yeah.
Well, I think IBM research it's an amazing place to work, because we have a lot of very, very good scientists, and in many different disciplines, ranging from the basic disciplines of physics, chemistry, mathematics, engineering, chemistry, did I say that? Anyway, all the basic disciplines, and a lot of people in engineering, a lot of people who understand technology. And IBM we're not just interested in sort of doing basic physics, although if it's really important we are, but we also we have in mind the use of technology to make the world, if you like, a better place, whatever that means, but have an impact on the world by our research. So I think that's what makes it particularly exciting. And we want to move quickly, and we have excellent laboratories with good capabilities.
Yeah, I've been to several research labs around the world, and you guys have pretty neat stuff here. I mean, to be able to study materials at the atomic layer and be able to move a single atom around the world.
Absolutely. So even within IBM Research, we have 8 basic research labs around the world, and we really are a globalized company, and research too. It's a global enterprise. And so we can take advantage of the strengths, as you mentioned, Japan and China and India. We have labs in all these countries.
In Israel.
In Israel, and in Zurich. And so we have excellent through our IBM colleagues, but of course as well as our own links to universities around the world.
Yeah. For a lay person, why does this matter? Other than you get cooler devices that eventually, that do more and are cheaper, hopefully.
Why does it matter? Well, that's pretty much a very philosophical question. And so, of course, the goal of the human race is to discover, to explore the unknown, and maybe by that understanding to answer some fundamental questions, whatever those questions you think are fundamental in your mind. I think.
Or more weird YouTube videos.
YouTube videos, they're interesting, but I think long term, 10, 20, 50 years, I'm not sure. I mean, some of them will be important, but I think the impact of our
well, I mean, if you were here 50 years ago, right, in 1956, and you were developing the first hard drive, would you ever imagine that you were developing more YouTube videos, really? Because that's really what you were doing.
Well, I would say, that's one way of looking at it. I would say what disk drives, our work on disk drives has allowed is essentially the ability to access all information in the world, whether it's on video or books or records or music. It really makes possible. So I think that has had a huge impact on the world in very fundamental ways, that it enables people anywhere in the world to have access to libraries, to information that wasn't possible before. And I think the free flow of information is really fundamentally changes people's lives and the whole world. I think it's very important.
Absolutely. When you were a kid, did you ever imagine that the costs and the speed of this industry would continue to this day? I mean, even since I was here last, the cost of a hard drive is cut in half in just a few months. A terabyte hard drive now is $100 or close to $100 at Fry's. It's just just an amazing industry.
I think exponentials, whenever they take place, are amazing. So but it happens in all aspects of our lives. Exponential changes happening all the time in our bodies, in spread of disease, in spread of information, and I think it is. But it's tough for a human. We work on such a short time scale, a few years or long or short, depending upon your perspective. But I think it's tough for us to appreciate what this means, this exponential growth of these technologies. Tough for anybody to appreciate, I think. And it is amazing. For 5 decades, we essentially have had this exponential increase in our ability to improve computers, improve storage, improve telecommunications. It's extraordinary.
Since we're in a new environment economically and politically, and so this lab being here in America really has meant a lot to our economy, right? Things that get spun out of here create billion-dollar companies. What do we need to do to keep our competitiveness in the future? What kind of kids do you need to see coming out of college to hire for the next generations of IBM researchers?
That's a very tough question, but I think you need to somehow make young people realize that research and science and technology and the exploration of new ideas is what's most exciting. So instead of just receiving perceived knowledge, so just reading the news reports or something, but having an impact is very exciting. So I think the science technology it's tough initially, and so somehow
for me, getting through that second year of calculus was killer. I got washed out. But
I don't know. I think that's a very interesting question. But I think somehow it's not easy to do science and technology, but at the same time the rewards, I think, are enormous. Discovering, even understanding, reading what other people have understood, their ideas, their concepts. That's I think that's what makes life very exciting, particularly when you can yourself, in a little way, have some impact on that growth of knowledge and wisdom, and hopefully improvements in everybody's lives.
Very cool. Well, thanks for spending a few minutes with me and
okay, thank you very much.
Explaining what you're doing here. It's really amazing stuff. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope you get your job done so we can have nicer devices.
Me too. Let's hope so. Thank you.